Okay, I think that we can start. Um, well, good morning, and thank you for being here. We know it's a Friday morning, it's 9:30 in the morning almost. So, thank you very much for being here. If you are here, we can imagine that you are curious or you are interested at least in these two concepts that we wrote down in as the title of our panel, this data journalism, European data journalism manifesto. This is like an idea that the four of us had a few months ago, thinking what we could speak about at Perugia. Also coming from a panel from the last year where we spoke about European data journalism. I think that the four of us have in common the fact that we work with data and as journalists, and that we collaborated in some pan-European project. We are seeing day by day as new projects coming based on data, based on collaboration between journalists, between coder and journalists, and also between journalists of different countries. And maybe sometimes if you stop and think about it, is one of the best imagine of a unite Europe somehow. So who are we? We are we, as I said before, we collaborated in some in different projects. My left there is Jacopo Ottaviani, is an Italian data journalist that is contributing to Internazionale in Italy and to a lot of big media around Europe. Then we have Sylke Gruhnwald from the National Swiss Broadcaster. She's a senior reporter there, and she's also a chairwoman of Journalist Fund. So it's really important to have her here as an idea of what Europe is doing in data journalism. And we have Anne-Lise Bouyer, a project manager at Journalist Plus, that I'm sure you know this organization that is the core of really great projects that are being done in Europe right now. I spoke of some projects, maybe you can know projects like the Migrants Files, Generation E, or for just to mention one that is really actual right now, also the Panama Papers, that is not really something European, but we think that it's really interesting how big organizations like the ECAJ are working in a really collaborative way. They have this idea of the radical sharing of all that they have between journalists that are working on the same project. So what we did to prepare this first draft of the Data Journalism Manifesto, we just wrote down some questions to a little bunch of European journalists. We sent them some questions. Some of them ended in a large Skype conversation. Others were just short answer to emails. And starting from that, we organized everything in a spreadsheet, obviously. And then we started writing this manifesto. Obviously, we know that nowadays data journalism is more or less everywhere. Everybody is, you're seeing it? Yeah. Everybody is speaking about data journalism, so we think that is a good moment to stop for 1 minute and say, okay, what are we doing here? And why are we talking about something that is European and is data journalism? So before entering the manifesto itself, we just would like to give you a brief idea of why we did the manifesto. We really think that measuring change should not be left to just to rich and powerful, and data journalism is really a big tool to fight against that. And I really like a quote from Nicolas Kaiser-Bril of Journalism Plus that wrote that the data journalism is measuring the unmeasured, exactly, that journalism is giving voice to the voiceless sometimes. And before entering in the manifesto itself, I would like to ask my colleagues what do you expect as an output or possible outputs of writing down a manifesto and asking people to contribute, because I forgot to mention the manifesto is still totally open. We use Medium to publish this first draft because it's really easy to comment and to add whatever you want, and we will be really happy to discuss it, to debate around it, and to add to the manifesto itself. So I would like really to know, guys, which are your expectations from writing down and putting black over white a manifesto like that.
Yeah. Hello. So yeah, the idea of manifesto, I think, came first because we realized that data journalism is used everywhere in like newsroom, journalism schools start to teach it, but it's very difficult to find a definition. Actually, it's like there's no proper definition of data journalism. So that's what we wanted to try to do with this manifesto. When we interview people as well, people was asking a lot of questions about what is a good data journalism project. So I think this manifesto can help us as well in defining some best practices of data journalism and first step in defining and measuring the quality of a data journalism project.
Well, when I was asked to contribute to this manifesto, it was very easily to be convinced to do so. My motivation is very similar to yours, Anne-Lise, that I would like to be able to set up a common understanding or foster a common understanding of what data-driven journalism means, actually. There are a lot of ideas out there in several newsrooms, I guess, but there is no common understanding yet, even though that in academia there are definitions. So we found many papers and we read those closely, but we need to bring them into reality, into the newsroom. And moreover, of course, being as a chairwoman of Journalism Fund EU, I have a very strong interest in fostering data-driven journalism across Europe, of course. So that we build up a even stronger community, that we manage to cross borders in our investigations, and that we do manage the different languages, different cultures, different ethical understandings of journalism as such.
I think that for me, the contribution to this European Data Journalism Manifesto had, first of all, a political meaning. I took part of these interesting projects in the last few years, such as the Migrants Files, Generation E, and while developing these projects with some amazing data journalists from Europe, at the same time we could read on the news the rise of populism, the crisis, the political crisis in Europe, and I felt like this could be a good occasion to counter the rise of populism and the rise of skepticism and Euroscepticism in particular. Why using data to do this? Because populism and propaganda are very often based on false facts, on legends, conspiracy theories and other things that I think data and properly developed data journalist projects that serve a European audience can really fight and debunk this kind of propagandistic approaches to Europe. In general, in terms of output, pragmatically speaking, I believe that this manifesto could be seen as a tool to push for common values that reflect the European values across the newsrooms and the organizations that are developing data journalism projects or data-driven strategies to communication, fact-based narratives, so on and so forth. And I believe that such tool could lead to very practical consequences. Just to give you an idea that came up yesterday while discussing the possible practical outcomes of this manifesto, we mentioned the Erasmus program for data journalists in Europe, why can't we envision nowadays an Erasmus program that helps data journalists from different countries in Europe to spend a month into a data team in another country, learn how the others work, and try to develop cross-borders, cross-European projects together. I think this manifesto could actually help to focus on these kind of needs, and also to like put ourselves into a framework of values and directions that can be followed to develop a better European data journalism scene.
Thanks. I think it's a great idea, especially for countries like Italy, where data journalism newsroom is like a bit difficult to see. I really appreciate that you started speaking about this word European that we put into the manifesto. So before launching you the other question, I just would like to ask you guys from the public, from the audience that you are here, if you want to add a comment right now or to ask a question. We would like really to make of this a big debate. We more or less know each other, so it's like you just raise your hands and you can add your comment, your vision to this. Well, you have one. Yeah, great.
Hi. Yesterday I participated into another panel, and they were talking a lot about transparency in journalism in general. So I think this word should appear in the manifesto, and maybe just speaking like this. Like being like a model for transparency. So with this manifesto, you could also be a model for the overall journalism, because the panel was talking so transparency in journalism and in newsroom, and so this could be also a model for other journalism.
Yeah, this is a really big issue, the transparency. So I think we can speak directly about transparency with you, and I think that we have like two sides of the transparency idea. We ask transparency to the institutions, but we also ask transparency to us as journalists, as data journalists, doing our work and being open with our data, with our code. And it's really a big issue. I mean, also when we shared the first draft with the people that we sent the first question, there was a kind of discussion about which is we need to be really clear between what is privacy, what is transparency. So I really would like to give you the words, and maybe Anne-Lise wants to start.
Yes. So thank you for your question. It's a very important point, and there are two things there: transparency and openness. That we found it very important in data-driven project. And the thing is, when we started to write it into the manifesto, openness, so giving access to raw data, to the source code, to the methodology, some journalists and data journalists that we interview ask us, and they say to us that it's great, but a lot of publishers are not very eager to share and to open their data and algorithm. So it's another problem to face. So they ask us as well, and we start to having this discussion and conversation about like what could be the arguments and how could they be convinced to open things and be more transparent. And I really liked the session of Stefan Feiermeyer, who was here in the room like 2 days ago. It was about like transparency, and he said in your session you say like 2 points that I think it's very important and that could be great arguments to convince publishers to open. First, you say that when you are working with a lot of data, it's impossible to fact check everything, which is totally true. So being transparent and opening the data to everyone and to the community shows that you are in the good faith, that you did your work like consensusly, and even if you couldn't check everything, at least it's open, and it can also help the community to fact check the data with you. And the second thing, obviously, is like a data set can allow multiple interpretations, and it's very important to let users have access to the raw data to see and to understand all the other possible interpretation. And so openness, it's very important at the end to, I think it really can help to increase the trust of the public in your work and in journalism in a broader way. And I think that's what all the publisher wants, obviously. And there is a second thing about openness. When we are talking about openness, we not really, I think, here in the manifesto talking about openness like in an open source movement. I mean, like, because we would like to talk about openness at the opposite of close, like we're in the pure way, like, because openness doesn't necessarily need to mean like being in the public domain, and you can open the data and still have a copyright if it's the main concern of the publisher, because sometimes it's true that you just cannot allow people to reuse your work, I mean, for several reasons. And even openness, sometimes it's impossible to give access to the data. For instance, like at Journalism++, we currently have one project we work on, and we cannot just release the raw data, because if we do this, we can be sued and be really in trouble. But that's where like transparency arrives, and even if you cannot, I think it's very important to be transparent and to explain why you cannot open the data and what are your choices.
I think that there is also a big part of this openness thing, talking about methodology itself, and also in methodology in cross-border projects. Maybe it's even more difficult than in normal projects to show total transparency methodology. So I would like you to share your experience, maybe to how to publish your methodology, how to deal with methodology in a big cross-border team.
Yeah, I think a good example where we managed to be quite open, or very open, was especially the migrants files. From the very beginning, it was clear that we would make the methodology clear and publish it and open the data to the broader public, meaning sharing it with other fellow journalists, of course, hoping that they would rework the data, recheck the data. That actually then did happen, and also reuse it, which has happened too. So there were other media houses then that weren't initially involved that actually started quoting us and working with our data. So for me, the migrants file from a European perspective is the best example, or best case, or best practice actually. Just on a side note, when we launched the Migrants Files, I was working for a privately held media company, and my publisher and my editor-in-chief, he didn't agree at all with that approach of being open and transparent and basically sharing the work that I did, that they would then put on the front page and hoping to sell the newspaper on the newsstands. So it was a huge amount of work for me, simply lobbying for the fact that we would choose this approach, but eventually they were convinced. It took a lot of time, and maybe it also takes a practical example where you actually just do it and not only talk about it. In comparison, now I'm working for a public broadcaster, and I would call on those public service institutions, public broadcasters, to be role models when it comes to making journalism open journalism.
I like the idea that, I like the definition of data journalism also as a movement. And I believe that this manifesto can actually drain the best from the data journalism movement and the best from the European dream and put it together into a framework, a list of points, of values, and of guidelines that could lead the European data journalists to create and produce more of these kind of investigation, European investigations, such as the migrants files. And I think that a relevant part of the data journalism movement takes inspiration from the open source philosophy coming from computer science and or related fields. And transparency is one of the values on which the data journalism movement reflects its identity. So I agree that transparency should be one of the core values of the manifesto, and I agree with the idea that transparency is not just a right, but it's also a duty in terms of methodology. We should, as people who take part of this European Data Journalism Manifesto, we should really accept the idea that we have to be honest with the readers. We have to show how we collect, elaborate, visualize, and fit the data into the narratives we are pushing out. So yes, transparency is a core value, but it's not just a right, even if it is a right. So parallelly to the methodology, the transparency methodology, we would all like to have a Freedom of Information Act everywhere in Europe, and this could be also a tool to push this kind of changes around. So it moves on two tracks, I would say. Transparency from our side as data journalists, and transparency from the institutions.
Yeah, because as most of you, I think, you know, in Italy there is no Freedom of Information Act. Although it was promised 1 year ago from a member of the parliament right here, but we're still without a Freedom of Information Act. And also in many other countries, but I think between the big countries, and in Austria neither. And in Spain we have a Freedom of Information Act is being approved like 1 year ago, so we are just starting and seeing how it's going. But so I think that the two sides of the transparency is really a big issue for us. A point that I would like to come back, as before, if you want, just raise your hands. But a point I would like to come back is the question of the idea of European and collaboration. So both. We mentioned the two words, but I think that we can center a bit on it because it's really the core of the manifesto. So all of you guys have been experiencing in European cross-border projects how different cultures, traditions, ways of working, timing, and everything can be put together in a big cross-border project.
I think it's important first as well to explain like why European, because that's what a lot of people at interview, probably you as well, ask me like, but why European? Why not just a data journalism manifesto? That's it. And the thing is, we really believe that there is a need for European journalism. I don't know if you guys remember about the horse meat scandal. You probably do if you are European. And you probably remember of this story, about the story in your country, the story as it was told in your country. The thing is, maybe go back, so the horse meat scandal, it's in 2013. So the British revealed that they found horse meat in the burger sold at Tesco. And so it was like shocking, big scandal. And 2 weeks after making fun of British, of course, French revealed as well that they found horse meat in the lasagna fondue. And again, like 2 weeks after, so 1 month after that the British revealed this, the Germany revealed that there was like horse meat as well sold in Aldi supermarket. And it's typically a European story, but at least at the beginning, the media, in the rush to publish something, they fall for the simpler narrative, which was like the Romanian slaughterhouse, where the bad guy and everything started here, which is not true. It happened after that Dutch and French were the bad guy. But so yes, at the beginning, I mean, at first, no one had a European vision. And the thing is, like, by opening the borders, the Schengen agreement created as well a lot of different new faces of Europe that nobody wants to see. And we really believe that journalists must step up and fill the void and really try to tell story at a European level, because otherwise we'll miss a lot of stories that happen in the horse meat scandal. Because yes, any story about trade is European, because whoever sells stuff from a European country sells it as well to the other member states. So other story about organized crime, foreign policy, migration, religion, culture, and all these stories are European. So yes, it's really what we think it's really important to have European journalism.
I agree fully, and I love the horse meat scandal, because it simply shows so well that journalists very often just stop at their very own borders, and that is not the case in so many stories. And me being based in Switzerland, side note, I do understand Switzerland as part of Europe, even though it's a little island sometimes. There are so often so many leads, especially when it comes to tracking corruption, tracking money to Switzerland. And we try to help our colleagues. For example, when OCCRP asked us to support their investigation into the Azerbaijani presidential family, we were happy to do so. And this is what I learned, especially over the last 2 years, that stories do not stop at borders, and that we somehow need a network where we can easily exchange ideas, request help, so on and so forth. So OCCRP for me is a fairly good model, is a very good model for the Balkans, but we sort of need that for the whole of Europe. And we're not having that yet. But I hope, and also again then with the work of Journalism Fund, I do hope that we can initiate it through this manifesto, where we do put a focus not only on data-driven journalism, but data-driven journalism across Europe.
Thanks. Speaking of which, I think that there is a question that every European journalist asks himself or his colleague. Do we need something like a European ProPublica? Why we don't have it? It could be possible. Europe is just it's just crazy to speak about it. I would like you to share your thoughts on this, because I think it's a big topic that we don't have a really big media covering European, in this sense that we are speaking about now, European issues.
I think that every European journalist or data journalist should ask every morning why we don't have a European ProPublica yet. And I think it's strongly necessary to have one nowadays, because it could help to counterbalance the problems we are facing in Europe. A non-profit news organization such as ProPublica doesn't work on its own, but it collaborates with existing media outlets in the US. This could be replicated easily in Europe, and this would also help to spread the European investigations in multiple languages, and to face the linguistic differences, and for example, publishing in English the results of investigations on its website, and then publishing in national languages around Europe the same results adapted to the local audiences, in a way that nobody is cut out from this process. This is one of the differences between the ProPublica, the American, the ProPublica.org. We all know in the US and the theoretical ProPublica.eu we are like envisioning together is that we have to deal with the linguistic and cultural differences in Europe. But that could be the right tool to do it. I think it's really necessary to have one in order to systematize the production of this kind of European investigations, in order to produce them methodically and not just on a tantum, just sometimes when it happens, when we have some funds to do it. It would be great to have structured funds to produce a number of investigations. They don't need to be all big ones, can be also very, very small and punctual ones, can be fact-checking sessions. I'm thinking of like the big issues that we are facing nowadays in Europe. Think of the Paris attacks. It was so messy in the media all over Europe during that time. There was a lot of it was frenetic, and I think that an entity, a cold entity such as a European ProPublica, running a fact-checking on what was being told around in Europe could be very helpful to keep our nerves under control, even if in very difficult situations. But that's just an example. It could be really applied in many different contexts.
I agree, and I mean the good thing is that we see good examples. I mentioned OCCRP already as I think a very good example. There is of course Correctiv in Germany that is growing eventually. We just have to be very clear that the main issue why we do not have it is simply again for the fact that we are very diverse, I guess, and coming from different cultures, having to bridge different languages, and then finding the funding for it is, I guess, the very crucial point. I don't think it's easy to do it. It would be manageable, but somebody has to do it, right? And I don't know who's the someone going to be honest.
That's a good question. And with which money are they going to use in that case? Before, if there are no questions about these points, I would like just to do just a short showing you which are the main parts of the manifesto that we wrote down after speaking with a bunch of journalists. We talked about why manifesto, why European. As we said before, we tried to make something like definition of data journalism, or what at least we intend as data journalism. We would like really to emphasize the fact that the goal is to try to understand and explain technical and sociological biases inherent to every data set that we publish. As we said before, we talked before about transparency, and we have not a point called transparency. Maybe there should be, but we have like transparency somehow diluted between different points, like privacy, for example. And methodology, as we were speaking before. I think that a really interesting part is also the maintainability and reproducibility of the data. And I mean, it's really important to, we really would like to point out this part, and maybe I think that maybe Anne-Lise could help us understand exactly what we mean with that. I mean, how we can store and not just store data, not just publishing data in GitHub that everybody can do it, but how to simplify future uses of those data. How is, in the Journalist plus case at least.
Mm-hmm. Yes, another important point in the manifesto was maintainability. So that stores the data in the format in a way that allow and simplifies future uses to create a sustainable database and not rework on the same things and reuse what's already be done. So yes, maintainability in order to reuse data is an important point.
Also, another important idea that I mean, when I started writing, I didn't thought about it. It was the idea of using some European data sets. What we mean exactly with the European data sets? I mean, we all know what a data set is. We normally have in our languages or relative to our countries. Do you guys think that having European data sets, not just Eurostat ones, but made by journalists by newsroom, could be an important point in that issue?
Yeah, but it's joins the point of having European stories. I think it's totally related, and it's true that storing the data in a machine-readable way, it's easier to have a database in like different languages, because at the end it's just data that's structured data. So I think it's easier to have European data sets.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to. So I really would like to hear your opinions, hear your questions. We have.
Hi, I'm Gianluca De Martino from Data Ninja, a team that you know. And we investigated on the confiscated goods in Europe, and the first obstacle is the this match of in the different countries, because we don't have a Freedom of Information Act in Italy. We have in Great Britain, in United Kingdom. And the first point for the manifesto, in my opinion, is to enrich a balance of law for the transparency in different countries. The second point is the legal protection for freelance, because in this cross-border investigation are involved employed journalists, employed and freelance. And freelance are don't have legal protection. Often in Italy, we don't have legal protection. And the third point is the methodology of peer review. When we investigate in cross-border affairs, we need to a peer review in referring the data, the informations, the documents, and many other questions. Thank you.
Yes, I agree that the manifesto should actually fill the gaps, help fill the gaps in Europe in terms of legal gaps. So we join forces to get the best out of all the countries we have and spread it into the other countries. This is actually, I think this is one of the most important points of the manifesto. The philosophy of it is to fill the gaps and to make Europe more united, especially in the data journalism movement, as I said, or journalism in general. Peer review, I agree that this is one of the advantages of working in team with people from different countries who speak different languages, who can actually shed light on the limits of their data sets by seeing what the other countries are, for example, exploring in their countries, what the other journalists are exploring in their countries. So the peer review mechanism is something that should be used, and we used it in some form in the migrants files. We divided, well, we asked everybody to have a look at the final results and to double check in order to maximize accuracy. So I appreciate the two suggestions. Next question.
Thank you. I run a multilingual news and debate website called Vox Europe that could be something close to what you're talking about, and we would love to be part of a European ProPublica. But as for now, we have found that the major issue is money. As in Europe, we didn't find a single foundation or something close to what you find in the US who would be happy to finance something, some news organization that would be pan-European, because everyone is focused on their own national public. You have a lot of foundations in Germany who would be happy to finance organizations like actually they are doing with, for example, Corrective. You have some in France, but very little. You have some in the UK, but they are focused on the UK, and also in the Netherlands and so on. So currently I haven't seen, but I would be happy to see one organization that would have a European vision, and a part of the European institutions who are not in the best position to subsidize news organizations for obvious reasons, because they would be the main target of investigation probably. I think that that's the major issue, finding someone who has who understands that there are European issues, so funding should be addressed in a European way. So it was rather a statement than a question, but anyway, answers are welcomed.
You want to say something? Very quick. My 2 cents on this. I think that we should actually try to combine different ways of funding, not just to look for one player funding our mission or our project, but to go further. Maybe we could think of, like, at some point, I'm not saying now we launch it, but at some point we would think of asking the European citizens to fund it with some kind of crowdfunding. There is this huge Erasmus community that changes. The people taking part of this movement change their identities simply. They consider themselves Europeans, and they are really motivated to have a more united Europe, because they tried and they had a very good experience very often with it. So crowdfunding could be another option. This is my personal opinion, and I don't think we are at the stage of sharing it in the manifesto, but I think we shouldn't close the doors to other big players as well. Especially nowadays we are seeing around players like Google or others who are which are funding the media. I know it can be controversial, but I also know that if they are not the only one funding, so they don't have the monopoly and the total control of our organization, they could be helpful as well. I think we need to be realistic at some point, and in total transparency, and as long as they don't take control of the project, we could also talk to other players who can have some interest in pushing the European data journalism project.
More questions? Maybe we can start somebody that still didn't answer first, and then thanks.
Hi. So is a European ProPublica really necessary, or are we doing, or do we need to get better at cross-border journalism rather? I mean, we have lots of media organizations, and so far we have failed to make European Union level stories interesting to the public, right? We usually just report on our national beat, and on the European level, it's not much. I cannot read a lot of stories on that level. So what would a European ProPublica actually do rather better? And it would have money. Okay, cool. But the question is where that comes from. But so what would it do? Would it just connect the different newsrooms? I mean, we couldn't do that without one, right? We can do just better cross-border journalism.
thanks for getting the point.
I totally agree. You do not necessarily need a formal structure, but a good network where you can contact your colleagues. As we are, I mean, us four, we are a good example. This is not a formal network that we at some point decided to set up together with our publishers, but it's because we value each other as persons, but also as professional journalists, and that is definitely a starting point. So initially there is no formal structure necessary, yet of course we may dream. So, and as I said, it's a case of funding, and that's I think the crucial point. But before that, we shouldn't be stopped at doing good stories on EU level.
I think it's a super interesting point. We could debate about it during hours. The small problem that I see when different newsrooms collaborate between assembly, that the output that we have is that we have the Spanish side, the French side, the Italian side, the German side, but not a European whole picture. Sometimes it depends from the projects. I don't want to extend much more on this and to give space to more questions.
Hi. Thanks for your manifesto. I think it's a great initiative. Working for one of the institutions of the European Union, I'm wondering, since you are using the European Union motto, your initiative is meant to be adopted mainly by European Union journalists. So I'm wondering, which is your strategy towards European journalists from other countries as potential candidates to join the Union, or countries as Russia or Turkey, that unfortunately they have an even more big problem of transparency that we have?
Europe is still a vague concept and can be adapted to different contexts. We really like the motto of the European Union. It doesn't mean that we are closing our project to only the members. We are actually open to everyone who feels European for some reason and who reflects himself or herself on the values and the guidelines and the methodologies that we are trying to systematize. So I kindly ask you not to think that we are closing our project. We'll make it more clear probably in the text to the members of the European Union only. We are all working together on the European identity. It's not very clear what it is yet, but we are all enthusiastic about this possibility. Next question.
See, so the other day I followed the panel on open data, and so I wanted to talk also about technological standards. So already there are technological standards that exist for open data. So maybe you could think about something like this. So the data that you produce should have some technological standards. Maybe you can refer to the Creative Commons. Already there's those standards. But we could also talk about standards for methods. So, and this would help also to open to others, because we say, so this is European manifesto for data journalism, but also is good practices for data journalism. So maybe this also good practices could come inside the wording, or so that everyone that wants to follow good practices could come here and, okay, how do I have to do? These are the steps that you have to follow. And this is something that has been done in the scientific community. I come from academia. So you have good practices for data sampling. They're not always followed, of course. But so I think there are interesting things that can come from science to here, because I see a lot of parallelism.
Thank you for the input. You want to answer?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. We do not have to reinvent the wheel at all, but we have to take the best from related disciplines. And that is concerning open data. This is, as you rightly put it, Creative Commons, and of course academia, especially in the context of working with with data, statistics, for example. Yes.
Okay, so we need really to close this panel, and we really ask you to drop us a line, drop us an email, comment on Medium. This is still open. We are not going to close it right now. We really want to make it something. We are just the guys that put these words on Medium, but we really would like to this manifesto being something really big, really shared between a lot, really European, shared between a really great lot, a big bunch of people and journalists. So thank you for being here. Thank you to my colleagues for being here, and see you around.